Welcome to your in-depth year 2025 astrology overview and zodiac forecast. I'm going to briefly outline how I'm going to structure the video. First of all, I'm going to share with you about two eclipses which occurred towards the end of 2024. The first of these ushers in a new eclipse series between the signs of Pisces and Virgo. But the first of these, a lunar eclipse, is very close to the shimmering energies of Neptune, which has been so profoundly important since 2012 in Pisces. Then on the 2nd of October, we have a solar eclipse in the air sign of Libra, very much about communication. But close to the eclipse is Mercury, the planet of talk and thought. But both these energies are going to feed into the early months of the new year in a very profound way. At the turn of the year, I'm going to share with you on screen the solar return. This provides a backdrop energy for the following 12 months that we can all collectively relate to. There's some mightily influential energy permeating within that. Now, as we go into the new year, it could be argued that the most important event of the whole year occurs on the 11th of January because the true nodal axis shifts, the north node inverting into Pisces and the south into Virgo. This hasn't happened for 17 years. They're intrinsically linked to the eclipse series, which is going to be so much to the fore this year. Now, as the year develops at the end of January, Uranus emerges from its retrograde and Jupiter at the start of February. But then we get a lot of focus on the sign of Aries, which of course is going to be very much in the astral news this year because of the arrival of Neptune and Saturn. But the early movers and shakers are Venus, debilitated, but also Mercury. But they're both going to go into retrogrades, and in Mercury's case, fire back to water. We get that again in the autumn. We actually get a fire retrograde just in Leo in the summer. But let's think about last year. We had a series of fire Mercury retrogrades, but then 10 days of Earth in Virgo. So this year we get 3 Mercury retrogrades in fire, but 2 invert into water. If we add water to fire, we extinguish the flame. What's the symbolism of that? Now, right at the heart of March, we get the second of the new eclipse series, this time in the practical sign of Virgo. But the sun in the sign of Pisces is very close to the rather limiting and certainly serious energies of Saturn. What's the implication? I'm going to share with you about the first cardinal quadrant. That's when the sun returns to Aries. We get the vernal equinox. But in Western tropical astrology, based on the seasons, this brings in a 13-week period. And it's really influential because it's all about initiation. But just as we get to the end of the month, we get the last of an eclipse series between the signs of Aries and Libra. This one in the Aries solar eclipse provides an opportunity for us all to really thrust forwards and work with our identities and manifesting our hopes in terms of new beginnings or injecting ongoing strands with greater passion and enthusiasm. But then on the 30th of March, Neptune comes to the end of a 163-year journey and moves into Aries for just under 8 months. It's going to return to Pisces later this year, and it will be next year that it completes its whole 164-year journey. But let's think of the symbolism. The sign of Pisces is about completion or culmination from a spiritual and psychological viewpoint. And of course Saturn's there, but Saturn's much cooler. And Saturn, when it joins Neptune on the 25th of May, which I will share with you, it's just for 3 months and 8 days through to the end of August. So the two are going to be together. It is a big news story, and they are linking back to Pluto in a powerful sextile. Definitely need to explore that for sure. But let's also think that Jupiter, the planet of growth, which has been in the quick-witted sign of Gemini, shifts into the feeling sign of Cancer on the 9th of June, but immediately clashes with Saturn and also Neptune. Now, of course, Jupiter and Neptune are both the co-regents of the sign of Pisces. But Jupiter is about growth. It likes being in Cancer. It's exalted here. So it should have given us an opportunity to work on our emotional expression and anything to do with nurture. But the presence of Saturn and Neptune squaring off to Jupiter suggests that Jupiter could be blunted in the following year. So we need to explore that. Now, as we go into the second cardinal quadrant in June, we also have a squaring off, as we have the summer solstice, with Saturn and also Neptune. So their presence isn't necessarily going to be a panacea. Saturn is also in its fall in the sign of Aries. Aries is about initiation, thrust. Saturn's about consolidation. So it's not really a natural fit. And of course, Saturn is near to completing the end of its 29.5-year journey through the heavens, which will be in 2026, because it is going to return back into Pisces on the 1st of September. Now, on the 7th of July, it's undeniable. It's so exciting that Uranus moves into the sparkling sign of Gemini. Uranus really doesn't like being in Taurus. It's in its fall, and we've seen that it's been a brutal experience, especially in terms of the cost of living, the freely available use of resources, anything to do with agriculture has also been a very tense issue. And Uranus moving into Gemini gives us an opportunity to sparkle around communication in a fresh way. But that Uranus position links back to Pluto in a trine, and they both link back to Saturn and Neptune in a very positive way, known as a grand minor trine or a golden triangle. So this is brilliant, it's undeniable, but it will be when Uranus returns to Gemini next year and Jupiter moves into Leo that we will get a really electric connection between Jupiter, Uranus, and also Pluto. So we've got that to look forward to for sure. Now, in the summer, we do have Mercury going retrograde in the ground sign of Leo. But September is such a busy month. Saturn returns to Pisces on the 1st, but we also have 2 eclipses in the sign of, to begin with, Pisces, so a repetition of the first one of the 18th of September 24, and then the solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. And if we think about Neptune and its journey through the sign of Pisces since 2012, escapism, which can be a very positive thing if we embrace the more spiritual dimension in all its different guises, or peacefulness, or we get into nature, or we enjoy water or healing, all of that's wonderful. But we've also had the more addictive energies of Pisces and Neptune, and seen a huge burgeoning of the use of, whether it's prescription or drugs that are for social use. That's been a huge boom. And perhaps the big picture of this year, that the nodal axis, in my opinion, the most influential part of this year, and not just the north node, it's the energy of the south node. So what we've created and the karma from that, we're being asked to look at it. We're being asked to find a better balance between our physical and more practical structures, but also our physical health, what we eat and what we cook, digest. A lot of rubbish has crept into the food chain, and the sign of Virgo is about purity. And on the other side of the heavens, the North Node is asking us to make sense of the Neptunian cycle, but also try to work with the Saturnian energy that's been quite potent since March 2023, which has brought a coolness, but also has asked us to work much harder at understanding how we feel. So if there was a word to sum up year 2025, I think it's a huge opportunity, and it may sound like it's a little bit of a trendy word, but I think it's the right adjective to find a holistic way of getting the balance between functioning practically but also being in touch with our more emotional and spiritual dimension. So the two areas are informing each other. So if we do have some escapism, nothing wrong with that at all. We're doing it through music or through film or through language or our imagination or some appreciation of the good things in life, but in a little bit more of a measured way. I think that's really what the universe is asking us to do. So as we come into the end of the year, we do have another fire back to water retrograde. Ironically, Mercury in Sagittarius, where it starts the year, not at its best, of course. But if you recall last year, Mercury started the year in retrograde and ended the year in retrograde in Sagittarius. So that's one up, but we do get one take of it, but it inverts back into Scorpio. So however much we try to initiate through the fire signs this year, the water signs, and particularly the nodal north axis and nodal point, or the point of destiny in Pisces, and also the eclipses are asking us to get more grounded in our feelings and make it work more practically. As we come into the end of the year, I'll explore with you the autumnal equinox, Cardinal Quadrant 3, and also the winter solstice, Cardinal Quadrant 4. We only get a small slice of that by the end of the year, but that is how I'm going to break this all down for you. I'm also going to share all the new moons, so you're fully informed of what year 2025 holds. Now below you can check out each of the 12 zodiac signs from the perspective of your ascendant, sun or the moon. They're deep dives, so they're very detailed, and you can click on the playlist below to go to the one you wish to watch. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. If you're new to my channel, it's lovely to have your company. If you've yet to subscribe, please help the channel to thrive by doing so, and also click in or tap in the bell notification symbol. If you'd like to have a one-to-one with me, I am a consulting astrologer. Please check out my testimonials below. And if you'd like to take advantage of my year 2025 personal horoscope forecast offer, totally unique to each person it's produced for, you can order in 24, get the rest of that year free, but also my special package of 30% off your life roadmap report. The combination of all this information will give you searing insights to guide your moves, and is fantastic value too. Please see the link below for more. Year 2025's astrological journey is rooted in the latter part of 2024. We have a new eclipse series ushered in on the 18th of September in the sign of Pisces. On the other side of the heavens is the sun in the precise Virgo. But very close to the position of the lunar eclipse is the shimmering mesmeric energies of Neptune, the co-ruler of the sign of Pisces. I feel in the latter part of 24 and into the first quarter or third of the new year, we have an opportunity to try to make sense of what Neptune in Pisces since 2012 has truly meant. Because of course Neptune is priming up to make its debut in the sign of Aries on the 30th of March. But also on the 2nd of October we have a solar eclipse in the air sign of Libra. Very much about equilibrium, balance, fairness, but also how we relate. But in the mix is Mercury. Mercury, very close to the sun and the moon, gives us an opportunity to use our minds in an even keener way, even though this sign is about communication. Now, the rulership of Mercury of Gemini is about those fast exchanges, but the rulership of Mercury of Virgo is very much about dry analysis. And in that sense, this Mercury solar eclipse gives us a real opportunity to decode and decipher some of the mixed messages that that lunar eclipse could create, because our subconscious is going to be powerfully activated by it. These two eclipses will work together even though they're not of the same series, or in other words, we need to make them work together or find ways to work with the energies that we're given. So as much as the solar eclipse in Libra gives us a chance to sharpen up our communications around relationships and perhaps also our listening skills, those can be influenced by rather deeper, more ephemeral energies that are harder to understand. So we could find ourselves hugely nostalgic for someone from our past, maybe even a little mournful if we feel that we didn't quite do what we could have done, because Neptune in Pisces is the sign of culmination. So it's very, very powerful before it makes that transition into Aries. But it's true that the solar eclipse in Libra gives us a chance to celebrate the things we have in common. So as we go into the new year, our sensitivity, the Pisces lunar eclipse, but our objectivity around relating can combine, but we're going to have to work at it, I feel. Now on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the year. The two eclipses are really going to be very potent in the early months of 25. The solar return is going to be very potent for the whole 12 months. Now, the sun is always in Capricorn at this time of the year, so very much to do with tradition, continuity, and the more material world. It's the sign of physical culmination. But as 2024 came to a close, we had a Capricorn new moon on the 30th of December. And that energy greets us as we come into the new year. So the moon's moved on, but it's still in the sign of Capricorn. Just a little footnote, the moon in Capricorn is not its best position, because the moon's rulership of Cancer is very much about nurture, protectiveness, very caring. The sign of Capricorn, very businesslike. But what we can do throughout 2025 is appreciate some of the traditions and more stable structures that do help to hold everything together. Sometimes those things can be frustrating to us, particularly if we're wanting to embrace an exciting new world in a fresh, innovative way. But those fabrics that are very important to our background, our experiences, what we're very familiar with, is something that can play out this year too. So also the sign of Capricorn can be very much about property. So that points towards all of us being mindful of the cost of property, whether it's rental or whether it is purchase properties, but also the lack of availability. You know, we need more homes for a lot of people. So that's going to be a major theme of this year, I feel. But Jupiter, the planet of growth, is in a retrograde as we start this year, and it's also in a square with Saturn, the planet which rules the sign of Capricorn, which is very much to do with consolidation. They reached a peak in their square on the 24th of December. If you recall, they also squared on the 19th of August 2024, and they're going to square on the 15th of June 2025, but they will both be in new homes by the time that happens. But we start this year with Jupiter in its obviously detriment in the sign of Gemini in a retrograde. So we're being asked to be mindful of not being too free and easy with what we pledge and what we expect, because Saturn's actually moderating that, asking us to be more mindful about how things feel, because it's in the sign of Pisces, like Neptune as we start this year. Of course, it will move like Neptune into Aries on the 25th of May, but at the start of the year it's providing or applying a handbrake to the more exuberant energies of Jupiter, which is in a retrograde. So that's suggesting that our ideas, the way we interact, need to be mindful of our inner world, which is where Saturn is located. Now, in a very thrusting, powerful way, we have Pluto in Aquarius, back there from the 19th of November 2024 for the long term through to 2043 initially, is in an opposition with Mars. So these are the two rulers of Scorpio, which is very much a sign of transition, but it's very deep, passionate, and it can be very much to do with willpower, but also power itself. So Mars is in the grand, proud Leo. Mars loves being in Leo. Here it wants to bask in the limelight. It wants recognition for its individual talents. But Pluto in the sign of the collective, Aquarius, is much more concerned with how it is for all of us. But Mars is in a retrograde. This retrograde is very, very important because it suggests that whatever we desire, and perhaps whatever we obsess about at the start of this year, we might not get it quite as quickly as we would like. The moon's in a sign which is much more safety first. We've got Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, squaring off with Jupiter, which is in a retrograde. So that's suggesting we need to go a little slower about how we think and express things. And we've got Mars and Pluto in an opposition which can create an enormous amount of desire, but because of Mars being retrograde, it's not necessarily going to get the recognition it wants because of the totality of the power of tiny Pluto. So that's really influential as we go into this new year. So I think for all of us, whatever we set our intentions to, whatever our New Year's resolutions are, things might not rattle along quite at the pace we would like. Now, if you look at the position of Mercury, Mercury is in Sagittarius, which like Jupiter means it's in its detriment, but like Jupiter, it's also squared off by Saturn. So we have a T-square. So Saturn is hugely important. So all through 2025, whatever we're thinking about and whatever we're trying to express or wherever we're trying to travel, we always need to be mindful of the inner emotional and psychological dimension, which is what Saturn is asking us to think about. But Saturn squaring Mercury means at times we could get a little dispirited, to be honest. Mercury is in the sign of Sagittarius, which on the face of it would give us a real passion for moving around, exploring things, but we can't rush. So again, there's a slowing down. So it's interesting. The focus for a lot of people is going to be Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries, but by looking at this solar return, we get a very realistic understanding of where we are. But there are some very strong advantages. Despite the North Node being about to inverse into Pisces, the true node, on the 11th of January, it starts the year forging a dynamic link with Pluto and also with Mars, which rules the sign of Aries, where the node is. So we've got some mutual receptivity there. So it's possible, for sure, if we've really worked hard at understanding our identity and our individual talents, particularly because the North Node has been in Aries along with Chiron, that's given us a real chance to work at that, together with last year's solar eclipse in the sign of Aries, and of course 2 new moons. So real opportunity. Of course, the second of them was challenged by Pluto, but we did have that thrust, that encouragement to be very single-minded. So that's still there, but we need to be mindful of our tactics, because Pluto opposite Mars can see us want to dominate. So if we have a situation where we're very sure of what we want to get from it, the problem with that tactic is it could arouse tremendous opposition. So the node's saying, listen to our instincts, even if it is about to shift into the deeply sensitive Pisces. Other takeouts is that Venus, the planet of relating but also money, is in the democratic Aquarius, but squaring up to the ruler of that sign, Uranus. So that suggests that for some people there are going to be some very exciting connections this year, but whether they'll be long lasting, that's another matter. So we've got the 2 planets that rule Scorpio in a very intense and, to be honest, quite sexual opposition, and we've also got Uranus applying to Venus in a very free-spirited way. So there could be some big connections, some dramatic connections, but equally some short-lived connections, because Venus and Uranus, when they're collaborating, are quite picky. Venus is quite picky with Uranus in a square. It's not going to give away its independence in Aquarius very easily, but it could boost up friendships. So Pluto and Venus in Aquarius, Pluto's linked with the node and Venus is linked with Uranus, suggests there can be some connections which will be exciting, but not necessarily long lasting, and some relationships where there's too much politics, just too much, despite that new moon greeting us in the new year, asking us to think about stability. I feel that some people will be wanting to separate. And it's important to understand that communication, or lack of it, not very clear communication, could be part of the issue. And that's where that solar eclipse on the 2nd of October is so important, to try to keep that little bit of detachment so the flow backwards and forwards is fair and reasonable. Because with having Mercury detrimented, Jupiter detrimented, retrograde, both T-squaring back to Saturn, a lot of old issues can bubble up to the surface in very surprising ways. Now, in terms of healing, there is actually a fantastic link between Chiron and Mercury. So if there is something that we want to still keep working towards in terms of understanding ourselves better, whether it's through self-help books, reading, any kind of leaflet or pamphlet which gives us extra insights, watching videos, or having some counselling, these are strands that can actually be very constructive and helpful to us. So that takes us into the early part of January. And on the 6th of January, we have a major event, because Mars, through its retrograde, inverts back into the sign of Cancer. Do you know, in fact, Mars moved into Cancer on the 4th of September and left on the 4th of November. But the retrograde began on the 6th of December in Leo, which is what greets us in this new year. But in actual fact, Mars in Cancer is a real big deal, because in total it's 26 weeks. So on the 6th of January, Mars inverts into a sign which it is in its fall in. So Mars can be quite defensive and prickly in Cancer. It's great if we want to crack on and get things done around a home renovation or work with contractors in some way, but because of Mars's retrograde, there could be some frustration until it goes direct on the 24th of February. Now, as I mentioned, the true nodal axis inverts into Pisces on the 11th of January, and the South Node into Virgo. And it's vital we don't ignore the South Node. The South Node is where our habitual behaviour is. The North Node is where we can be guided. The North Node can be known as the point of destiny, and it's almost like a collective draw towards a particular direction. And it can be, in a very positive way, over the next 18 months, a marvellous opportunity to enlighten ourselves to a much greater degree, particularly in the sign of Pisces. Well, on January the 30th, Uranus, which has been retrograde for its usual 5 months, goes direct in the sign of Taurus. I think we can all let a sigh of relief out about that, and that's going to be very helpful. But on February the 4th, Venus makes its way into the sign of Aries, but on the same day, Jupiter ends its retrograde, which is something also to celebrate. But Venus going into Aries does have its challenges. Personally, I like to question the essential dignities, but Venus is debilitated in the sign of Aries, but I feel it gives us an opportunity to get on the front foot. Venus can be about desire, it can be about our personal appearance. The sign of Aries is very fresh. If there is someone that we're attracted to, we could take the first move. If we're setting our intentions around our appearance in the early part of the year, we could find ourselves trying to update our look or our wardrobe in some kind of way with Venus's help. February the 24th, as I mentioned, the ruler of the sign of Aries goes direct, but in Cancer. If you've been waiting for someone to turn up and crack on with that job, they're likely to do so then. March the 2nd, however, sees Venus go into a retrograde in Aries. If there is someone that you've initiated a connection with, it could slow down then, or you could just be thinking a lot about relationships in general. You don't have to be in one, but you could also be thinking about money, because Venus isn't just about relating. It can be about our self-worth and our values. And perhaps there is some kind of update or refreshment that's required that the retrograde can help prime. But on March the 3rd, the sign of Aries is given extra prominence because Mercury darts into the sign. Mercury's not particularly happy in Pisces because it's detrimented there, and the wateriness blurs the clarity of Mercury's rulership of Virgo that was opposite. So Mercury into Aries supports Venus's retrograde, so you can still make steps forwards with Mercury's help. So that brings us to March the 14th. Huge event, the second of the eclipse series between the signs of Virgo and Pisces. This one's the mirror of the one that occurred on the 18th of September 2024, which is why I wanted to explain that to you so you could see how this was all joining together. And also the eclipses work in with the nodal axis. It's all part of the same pattern. Now this one is opposite Saturn, so the Sun very, very close to Saturn. Let's think about what Saturn and Pisces has meant since March 2023. It's been asking us all to work much harder at understanding how things feel, or perhaps tackling the things that we're not so conscious of, but also being more aware of the consequences of what we've been doing over a long period of time. So oceans and rivers is a classic example of where Neptune's lack of structure has meant that there's been too much deregulation, particularly around contaminants and packaging and chemicals that have all gone into the water. So Saturn's been bringing some of those players much more under the astral microscope. So they've been scrutinized more by governments, by campaign groups. There's much more awareness of what the consequences have been of Neptune in Pisces in an unregulated way, which is very Neptunian, very escapist. So the aquatic Neptune has been benefiting from the structural Saturn, if we think about it in that way. But what we're being asked here is also to balance, and I feel that that's what the theme of this year is truly about. Balance the more practical energies of Virgo, where the moon is, against the more feeling energies of Pisces, where Saturn is. But if that's an issue, if we've got a relationship or a situation where those two principles are out of kilter, they're not blended, then that's the opportunity over the following 6 months. But also it could bring some stuff into the open that's quite painful because of the repression that could have been part of the theme of Pisces. Pisces has an archetypal energy of being very compassionate and caring and giving to the nth degree. Totally agree with all of that. But I also feel that Pisces has a completely opposite energy, which can be very detached and cold. I always use the example of the trout in the pond looking up at the angler, trying to win the battle, and the trout's very well aware of what's going on, keeping a very cool eye on proceedings and very unperturbed. It's not going to be caught. And so I feel that Pisces energy can be very cool as well. You know, everything has the polar opposition in it. Every part of life is a polar opposition in some way. So that's what we're being asked to think about over the next 6 months. But on the 15th of March, Mercury goes retrograde in Aries. The 20th, we have the spring equinox, the start of the Western tropical astrological year. So it's a giant moment in the whole calendar. It ushers in Cardinal Quadrant 1. It's the rebirth. And it's an exciting time. It's a time when we're thinking about renewal, injecting extra energy into any strands that are really engaging us. And over the next 13 weeks, we can usually get on the front foot. But this year, it's going to be complex because on the 27th, Venus in its retrograde inverts out of the sign of Aries and into Pisces. Now, whilst it's true that Venus prefers to be in Pisces to Aries because it's exalted here, it's actually still in retrograde, and it's going to be retrograde through to the 12th of April. So that part of the year which the nodal axis, the north node, the point of destiny, is asking us to lean into, to feel things, to be guided by our senses, but at the same time stay aware of the need for practical logic, Virgo. That is really the big issue here. So this particular spring equinox is not quite as full powered as it could be in terms of being on the front foot. So that's why anyone talking about Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries in isolation will miss the bigger picture. But March the 29th does see the Aries solar eclipse, and we are seeing the conjunction between Venus and Neptune in Pisces. So again, that Aries solar eclipse very much about being very dramatic, thrust in, self-assured. It's almost like a superchild ascendant, if you like. It's about representing ourselves in the most dynamic way, but the more spiritual and psychological and even artistic and creative side that is conjured up by Venus and Neptune is very much in the mix. Now, ironically, the next day we have a massive paradox. Mercury inverts into Pisces, where it doesn't like to be in its retrograde, and Neptune, the ruler of Pisces, steps forward into Aries. So we get two ingresses but going in different directions. Now in the case of Neptune, it's going to be in Aries for 7 months and 3 weeks through to the 22nd of October. And it is a big deal. If we think about the initiating fire energies of Aries applied to the gaseous aquatic Neptune, it suggests that maybe we do need to think in a new dynamic way about how we use our senses and how we use our creativity. But in April, on the 7th, Mercury does at least go direct in Pisces. On the 12th, Venus goes direct in Pisces, very helpful. But perhaps most impressively, on the 18th, Mars returns back into Leo, which it left on the 6th of January, but this time unfettered from the retrograde. Mars loves being in Leo. If we think about it, Mars rules the third decan of the sign of Leo. Leo is very, very charismatic. The first 2.5 degrees of the sign, where Mars initially goes into, really amps up the glamour and the positivity that Leo can create. So the potential to really get things moving that perhaps have got a bit stuck and a bit bogged down. But by the 27th of April, we do have a Taurus new moon, but very powerfully squaring Pluto in Aquarius. What's the implications for this? Well, I would say it's about money, because Taurus isn't just about money, it's about worth, self-worth, values, can be about agriculture, can be about more sensual and sensuous strands, food, the things we enjoy. But I've got a feeling, because Pluto is in the sign of the collective, how we're all connected around resources is going to be a big deal in the following month. So we could see some news around finances at that time. Now, May the 25th sees Saturn join up with Neptune in Aries. But I must stress that Saturn here is in its full. Aries initiates, Saturn consolidates. So they're not natural allies. It's here for 3 months and 8 days through to the 1st of September. So what can we expect with the combination of Saturn and Neptune through to the end of August? Well, we need to think that Neptune can be about dreams and idealism. And we know that Saturn can be very much about realism. So whatever we're trying to envision, we need to approach it in a structured, disciplined way. So that's a very simple interpretation, but that structure is going to be important. So sometimes with Saturn, the application and perspiration are just as important as the idea. So remember that old saying of form and function? That's what I feel works for this. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't still work with the spiritual realm, but we need to apply them in some kind of real way. And of course, if we do have enthusiasm for new ideas, we will also need patience to see them through. But of course, the combination are also linking back to Pluto in Aquarius. What can we expect from Saturn's link to Pluto? Well, if we think that transformation is the big theme with Pluto, and also, of course, it can be about power. It can sometimes be about obsession and things being revealed. In the sign of Aquarius, I think it's very much how we're all going through this huge shift together. So we need to make sure that we maintain our personal responsibility around the way things are shifting. If we do see things developing in terms of an individual approach, we always need to be mindful of how that might affect us all. So we may see some new leaders developing, which could be really exciting. I think it's more likely to be next year, 2026, but we could see the germ of that really being seeded during this particular transit. Now, as for Neptune and Pluto, they've actually been aligned for a long time now, and it's very much a societal change if we think about it. And perhaps some of the dreams that we may have or we might have had, what Pluto shows us in the dual sign of Aquarius is that although people may have thought that some of the structures they wanted to tear down with Pluto's rulership of Capricorn, if we think that some things that have endured because they served a purpose, and sometimes discipline and good manners and consideration, some of those old-fashioned qualities, they're still things we can cherish. And because the sign of Aquarius has the more innovative Uranus as its co-ruler and the more stable energies of Saturn, we get an idea of how we might work with Neptune in Aries. So it's going to be some fresh approaches, but we also need to be mindful of, again, how they play out in terms of our connection to one another. However, May the 27th does see a sparkling, and I mean sparkling, new moon. It's in Gemini, but it's close to Mercury, the ruler of the sign. So if ever there was a chance to try to elevate the process of our connection with one another, speed things up and create greater clarity, that's going to be a great asset to it. Now, June the 9th sees Jupiter return to Cancer. Obviously, Jupiter cycles are usually every 12 years, but we've had some rather unusual orbits over the last few years. It is going to go retrograde on the 11th of November, but immediately it's clashing in a right angle with Saturn and also with Neptune. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. The sign of Cancer is a cardinal sign, so it likes to create a mode of security and stability. So the new energies that are coming through might not quite work in some ways. That, in other words, there could be a brave new dawn developing, and in some ways that might not feel particularly secure and stable for all of us. The other side of Jupiter is, of course, Jupiter can promise a lot but not always deliver. So we need to be mindful, and in a way, Jupiter being applied to by Saturn, like it was towards the end of last year and last August, is reminding us to keep our feet on the ground. You know, we can be very flamboyant, but we still have to deliver on our pledges. Now, on the 15th of June, the square between Jupiter and Saturn is exact. So that can be a tension point. But I actually feel that Jupiter through the following year is not going to be quite as flamboyant as it might be if Saturn and Neptune weren't squaring to it. The other thing with Jupiter and Neptune, if we get them in any harsh angle, opposition or square, can create a sense of unreality. So part of that unreality could come from astrologers expecting Saturn and Neptune going into Aries to be a completely wonderful new dawn without being mindful of these Cancerian energies. But I should say, it is true to say that the sextile between Saturn and Neptune and Pluto is very positive. And of course, we're going to have Uranus joining in with that, and I will share that shortly. But the 15th of June, we could feel some inhibition about our sense of security around home or family. But the 20th sees the summer solstice, the second cardinal quadrant, ushering in Cardinal Quadrant 2, 13-week period, but that too squares with Saturn and Neptune. So there's some chaffing going on at this part of the year. The 29th sees the Cancer new moon. Guess what? Chaffing with Saturn and Neptune again. So our need for stability, security could be challenged by some of the new developments and innovations or energies that are pulsating around the heavens due to that duo in Aries. It's going to be on June the 30th, 2026 that Jupiter bustles into Leo, and it's going to meet in a fine angle on the 19th of July, a tremendous link with Uranus and also Pluto. But July the 7th does see the aforementioned Uranus pitch up for 4 months into the delightful Gemini. Because the transition of Uranus through Taurus has been so tough, if we go back to when Uranus first moved in Taurus on the 15th of May 2018, it squared up to Mars just on the anaretic degree in the sign of Capricorn. Then Mars went into Aquarius, went into a retrograde as it does every 26 months. And of course Uranus was retrograding, so the two were chaffing against each other for 5 months really, and that meant that when Uranus pitched up in Taurus, a sign that we all know it doesn't like being in, because that's really the precursor astrologically to what instigated the Second World War. Very similar themes: land grab, people wanting to impose dogmas on people, and a shortage of available foods or fuels, which has driven up costs and therefore made life very difficult for an awful lot of people. So I feel that Uranus moving into Gemini is a much better news story, because that seed energy of Uranus in Taurus was so unhelpful, because the warlike Mars was in the outspoken Aquarius, and so also in both fixed signs a lot of stubborn resistance. Now this time on July the 7th, Uranus it's going to move back into Taurus on the 8th of November, but that energy is really exciting, and it of course links back in a trine to Pluto and a sextile to Saturn and also Neptune. So a grand minor trine, a golden triangle, really, really exciting. So what can we expect as Uranus moves into Gemini, particularly in its relationship to Pluto? Because in fact, when Facebook started, that's an Aquarius business, believe it or not. So we are going to see radical changes of the way society communicates and interacts. We could see, in some ways, Pluto in Aquarius is definitely not a panacea, because the sign of Aquarius can also be quite cool, detached and remote. And we are seeing a lot more people live alone, and a lot of people relying on digital interfaces in order to have a connection. And we all know, if you ever want to ring up a business or even your local doctors, that all the automation we have to plough through is hugely frustrating. So technology doesn't necessarily make for a better human existence. But we could see more decentralization, but we could also see a lot more things like monitoring that could come through different devices. And of course that could have serious implications for human and personal liberties. But also ideas will even more likely speed up from where they are now. So the world can change even faster than it is at the present time. So we know that when Pluto made its first 11 weeks entrance into Aquarius, that AI just seemed to really be the consistent and concurring theme. So there's going to be more of that. But things like implants into people's bodies, all this kind of stuff, it's all coming. You probably won't have a watch in another 20 years. You're probably speaking to your wrist. There used to be a TV series in Britain years ago called UFO, and I think that's the kind of stuff that we're heading towards. Some of it will be good, But, you know, if they can make the human body live longer, who's going to benefit the most? It will be the people with money. And we've already seen people with money don't always necessarily make decisions that are based on the good of the masses. It's very much for the good of who they represent, their small section of society. So, going to be very interesting. But Uranus for those 4 months can be a levitating escape from the challenge of Uranus making its way through Taurus for sure. Now, of course, as we get into the early part of July, we are going to see Uranus very, very close to some potent fixed stars. So it's going to be very interesting to see if anything does happen with Algo in that alliance with Uranus. And of course, again, when Uranus makes its way back into Taurus. So the Pleiades could have a big impact on us all at that juncture of the year. On July the 18th, Mercury inverts in the sign of Leo. If we think Leo can be sociable, creative, playful, and very much about connectivity, it could be that some dates or events do get bogged down, changed, but as ever with Mercury retrogrades, we can use them as an opportunity to reset, rethink, recalibrate in a positive way. July the 24th, however, does see the Leo new moon, and it is opposite Pluto. So that's almost like a repetition of that Mars opposition with Pluto that we had at the start of the year. What we can get with the Sun, particularly opposite Pluto, is obsession. And people can also be very, very caught up with expressing their ego, the Sun, in a very powerful and potent way. So that need to find the midpoint between the democracy of Aquarius and the need for individual recognition, attention of Leo, is very, very highly tuned up. However, helpfully, there is a really good link with Saturn and Neptune. So in that sense, the fire energy there can really give us all an opportunity to move forwards on something. But Pluto's just saying, look, how does this work out for anyone on the receiving end? August the 10th, Mercury goes direct. Sigh of relief all round. August 23rd, we have the first of 2 new moons in Virgo. But this one is square Uranus. And that's why, again, if we're imagining, envisioning, Neptune, Saturn to Aries, Uranus to Gemini, everything's going to be wonderful. No, there are challenges along the way. So August the 23rd, the Virgo new moon, which is very much about precision, practicality, virtue, refinement, trying to make things work that much better, even if it's just marginal gains. The electric energy of Uranus in the quick wits of Gemini, got 2 mutable signs, both ruled by Mercury, are in a tense alignment. So there could be something that we discuss that can cause tension. I think that could be quite a stressful new moon. So over the following 4 weeks, the chances are folks generally can be on edge. One of the things I would just say with 3rd, 6th house squares is not to try to do too much. And of course, Virgo is speaking to the part of our nature that wants to get things done, clear up those tasks, be more ordered. And, you know, our nervous energy can be absolutely, you know, we're going to be rattling with Uranus and Gemini. So we need to slow things down, because otherwise things can get very adrenal indeed. September the 1st, it's a massive moment of the year. Saturn returns to Pisces. The 6th, Uranus goes retrograde in the sign of Gemini. The 7th, we have the repetition of the lunar eclipse in Pisces that we had the year before on the 18th. And this one sees the moon in Pisces very close to the point of destiny, the North Node. September the 21st is the blue moon, the 2nd Virgo new moon within 4 weeks. But this one is going to see in opposition both Saturn and the North Node. So if we think about what Virgo wants us to achieve on the other side of the heavens, we're really being reminded that however much we might want to change the physical plane, we always have to be conscious of the emotional sphere. I think it's possible that that new moon could see some people struggle a little bit with their energy, maybe, to be honest, with some health issues. As we saw COVID play out, the Virgo energies were quite profound in terms of the triggers when Neptune was in opposition. And of course, Neptune's very much linked to viruses. Saturn's much more restrained. So if we are someone who tends to be very reserved, keeps our feelings to ourselves, what we can end up with is a stress illness, or if we feel inhibited about sharing how we feel because our conditioning tells us that that shows weakness. Those are the kind of things that solar eclipse is asking us all in the latter part of 25, but also the early part of 26, to grow on from, to become more aware that our health is homogeneous, that it is more than just our physical well-being. It's not just what we eat and drink and the exercise we do. It is more to do with the spiritual and also psychological facets of our makeup too. September the 22nd sees the autumnal equinox, but this one is super in Libra, ushers in that opportunity to connect, relate well, but it forges a wonderful angle to Uranus and a wonderful angle to Pluto. So we have a grand air trine on that event. We'll take that. That brings some extra burst of energy in, which could be really exciting. 21st of October sees the Libra new moon squaring up with Pluto. So there's Pluto again. It's still quite a challenge in a square, and it's because the new moon is occurring so late in Libra. So, you know, when the sun returned to Libra with the autumnal equinox, Pluto was blessing the relationship. Now it's cursing it. So Pluto, what do we make of Pluto? Well, of course, Pluto is about power, can be about the aforementioned obsession, transformation, can be about deconstruction, but also about rebirth. But it's also the planet of consequences. So I think because this particular new moon is so late, if we've been relating to somebody who is saying all the right things but actually still acting in a way that they want to have all the power, that's going to be a tense event. The 22nd of October, however, sees Neptune return to join up with Saturn and the North Node in Pisces. 29th, however, sees Mercury move into Sagittarius, where it starts the year. Not particularly happy in Sagittarius. Not retrograde though, is it? Well, yet. Because it goes into retrograde on the 9th of November. But just before that, on the 8th, we do have Uranus returns to Taurus. The 19th sees Mercury inverse back into Scorpio. So remember I said before about fire, water. So fire, water can extinguish the flames. So with the ideas we have, particularly in Sagittarius with Mercury, tends to be a bit unconstructed, and maybe because Mercury can be about quick communication or a bit overthinks things, it doesn't quite work in Sagittarius as well as you would imagine. But the Scorpio new moon of the 20th of November is opposite Uranus. So we could see some tension around financial markets, and also we may have an innate desire to splash out on something in a very impulsive way. Or is there going to be someone who makes our pulse race in a very hard to resist way? Either is possible. 29th of November, Mercury direct. Thank you. December sees the 20th, the new moon in Sagittarius, but proving that Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries is not a panacea. As we get to the end of the year, Sagittarius, which likes to be 3 and obviously very independent and very adventurous, is squared off by Neptune and Saturn. So that's a really tough one, that is. And it may mean that some issues that we're dealing with can really get amplified in ways that we find quite challenging. Maybe someone's going to bring up some old stuff. There could be some legacy issues that come back into the open. But then on the 21st we have the winter solstice in Capricorn, And I love the winter solstice in Capricorn in a way because it gives us an opportunity to really think about the seasons in terms of the importance of the connection to nature. You know, we know that it's the shortest day, but we also know that soon after that, the days are going to slowly but surely get longer. So it has huge symbolism. And of course, it ushers in Cardinal Quadrant 4, which in this annual dimension only lasts for another 10 days. But it actually lasts through to the spring equinox of 2026. So to summarise, we have an exciting year with the new eclipse series between the signs of Virgo and Pisces. That's very much about trying to find the balance between the practical, structural, efficient, and very tangible elements of life. It's an earth sign, of course, Virgo, whereas the mysterious Pisces is also immutable, but it's a water sign. It's very gaseous through its rulership of Neptune, but it's very idealistic through its rulership of Jupiter, which is its traditional ruler. And Jupiter can, you know, make our expectations be very, very high in the sign of Pisces. So we're being asked with the nodal axis to tune in and make sense of Neptune's journey through Pisces since 12 and Saturn since 23, and really work with these eclipses and getting a better balance in our lives. So I feel that in terms of the big picture, for sure, Neptune going back to Aries for the first time in 163 years is a huge story. Saturn going there after just around about 28 and a half years is a big story. But that nodal axis is the biggest story, believe me. And Uranus clashing with the Virgo, the first of the Virgo new moons. And you've seen now with Jupiter moving into Cancer, clashing with Saturn and Neptune. And so, you know, there are going to be some discordant energies as we go through the year. But there is an opportunity with the Libran solar eclipse of the 2nd of October 24 to work at our listening skills, work at relating, try and get a bit more logical. But the dreamy, drifting, immersive and dissolving energies of Neptune is going to be so potent this year. So the fire of going into Aries will be welcome. The grand minor trine as Uranus moves into Gemini, welcome. But they're not going to be a panacea. And the big picture is really about those eclipses in Virgo and Pisces. I'm wishing you all the best for this year. Please check out your deep dive for each of the zodiac signs by clicking through the playlist, and I will put the links in a playlist beneath this video too. Take care and all the best and goodbye.